Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Warhammer, or maybe I should say Games Workshop, is a massively popular tabletop battle game brand thingy. Personally, I really love the models that they make, and there's some amazing fantasy monsters, mechs and armies. I will be honest, the game itself doesn't really appeal to me. I'm far too impatient for games like that, but I do actually still buy and paint the models, and what you're seeing now are some of my own paintings. As with any popular thing, video games get made, and there's a crap load of them based on the various Games Workshop properties, and in this video we're going to take a look at some of them to see if they're any good. Oh, and if anyone can show this video to Henry Cavill, that would be great, so he might finally be my friend if he sees this and give me a part as an extra in his upcoming Warhammer TV series. Anyway, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. We are going to start on the PC with Shadow of the Horned Rat, which was also released for the PlayStation 1. This is a very tactical real-time strategy game, and the story goes that the rat-like beings, the Skaven, are being all ratty and assassinating people, which is leading up to a war. Throughout the game you take control of a few mercenaries who are in charge of getting rid of the ratty rebels and being hired by various people with loads of money. Now, I will be honest, I went into this game expecting it to basically be Command & Conquer or Warcraft, but in a Warhammer setting, but be warned, it is not like that at all. This game is a lot more in-depth and relies a lot more on strategy, planning and unit management, and to be honest, I really just couldn't get into it. You've got a number of missions and are briefed at the start of each one as to what your conditions for completing it are. There's also fees for various units and mercenaries, so before each mission you have to choose what units you want to take in, and you really need to consider how much you want to spend, and which units will be best for that mission. It's not often that you get new units during the battles, so choose wisely. Missions also have other prerequisites, like not letting civilians die and that sort of thing, which can determine the outcome of the battle. When you start a fight, there is a deployment stage, where you have a designated area that you can have your units start the battle in. Once all this is sorted, then the game starts proper. Without a guide or a manual though, you're likely to be very confused. There's lots of buttons and actions you can take, and you'll need to switch between your units, choose their formations, give them orders to move, attack or defend, or even use items like strength potions to change the tide of battle. There's plenty of boxes all over the screen filled with stats, and you have a scroll that gives you an idea of what's been going on throughout the level, though it didn't really help me too much. The map is all 3D, and you can move and rotate it to the best view for you, which is nice, and you've got a 2D version of it that you can use for a quick navigation or reference, which is handy. You'll be able to see enemies and objectives on the map, but I really didn't feel like the game was very responsive to any of my commands, making the battles and levels very slow and tedious. Getting your units to move where you wanted them to go and to attack was a bit of a pain. It doesn't help that everything moves quite slowly, and it's often hard to make out what's going on in the fights. I would often fail missions and have no idea why, but other times I'd breeze through them and also have no idea why, and mainly when I was playing the game I didn't really have any clue what the hell I was doing. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a bad game, I just think it's one of those games that is so far off my radar that I just have no idea what's going on. I actually remember it being pretty popular back when it was released, as well as its sequel, Dark Omen, which I was going to include in this video, but after playing this one, I just didn't really want to. So yeah, don't take my word for it. If you're into strategy heavy games, or Warhammer of course, then this might be right up your alley. But if you're one of those twats like me who just wants to kill, crush and destroy, then you might want to avoid this one. I know there are more strategy games based on Warhammer that might suit me better, and I do plan on giving them a go at some point, as I'm sure there'll be a part 2 of this topic in the future. And now for something completely different. Here is Warhammer 40,000 Fire Warrior, released for the PS2 and PC. This is the PC version. Here you play as a Tau Warrior, which are a sort of alien race of people. Well, I guess it depends what planet you're from, I suppose. You are called Shausa Kai, and you have to defend your planet, which is under attack by bloody humans. What a surprise. What's cool is that the game's plot takes place in just one day, and sees you deploying in the bunkers at the start of the day, and then you get to see your day unfold as you infiltrate more bunkers, workshops, prisons, factories and caves. As you've noticed by now, it is a first-person shooter, and most of what you'll be doing is shooting people in the face. You get a half-decent variety of weapons to use, mainly your Tau laser rifle, and this is one of those games where you can only carry 2 weapons, and one of them is actually always this rifle. You can only ever swap out your secondary weapon, which can be a really tough decision and kind of annoying sometimes, as you've got to try to figure out if you want to keep a shotgun or swap to a sniper rifle or even the rocket launcher. Ammo can be scarce for a lot of the weapons, even though there are ammo crates littered all over the place, and enemies will actually drop theirs when you kill them. You do also have a few grenades, and most weapons have a secondary fire mode, which is either a more accurate one that fires slower, or maybe has an explosive, or sometimes it just zooms in a little bit. Most of the weapons are pretty good to use, but something that is a bit annoying is that enemies don't really react to being shot, and there's not a whole lot of blood here. Also, they tend to take quite a few shots before dying. This makes it hard to know if you're actually hitting them most of the time, and while they will inevitably die, it does take some of the fun out of the gunfights, as all the enemies just sort of stand there soaking up your attacks, seemingly oblivious to the fact that you've just shot them in the face at point blank range with a laser. The levels themselves are all pretty large, with a few objectives, mostly getting from A to B, but there are times where you've got to find explosive to destroy walls, gun turrets or doors, and other times you need to rescue hostages or kill an enemy commander. And despite my moaning earlier, the battles here are actually pretty fun. There's not a massive variety in enemies, mostly just your usual soldiers and a few space marines here and there, but the scale of them can be quite large. You've got shield that recharges, which is handy, as you can't take too many shots to the face before you die, which I guess is realistic. There are health kits littered around the levels as well, so you do have a fair chance, and you're probably going to need it, as even on the PC, there's no quick save option here. You've got to hit checkpoints at certain parts of the levels, die before you get to one, and it's back to the start for you. None of the levels are massively huge though, so it doesn't matter too much. Graphically, it all looks decent enough for the era, nothing will really blow you away these days, and I do kind of like some of the lighting, and there's a few locations which are really cool, but most of it is just battle damaged buildings and areas, as you'd expect from this era of games, and there's lots of grey and brown. I've got no complaints with the controls, the PC version plays well, and I never had any issues. I can't say for the PS2 version, but I really did have fun with this one. It's a pretty short game and you'll be able to breeze through it in probably about 4 or 5 hours, but it's still a fun playthrough that is starting to show its age, but worth a try. Space Hulk is its own standalone board game that takes place in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, where a group of Space Marine Terminators have to take out waves of evil Tyranid gene stealers that have overrun the giant spaceship known as the Space Hulk. The video game version, Space Hulk Vengeance of the Blood Angels, shown here on the Sega Saturn console, sees you take charge of a team of Terminators going through the narrow corridors of the Space Hulk, where you're given a number of objectives to complete, like restoring power, killing enemies, finding key items, and the usual stuff. But this is never as easy as you'd think. In fact, I'd probably go so far as to say that this is one of the hardest games that I've ever played. You have a few options for missions here. You can go through training, campaign, or you can play what I think are a lot of virtual missions based on the board game. The original missions and more. In fact, there's a ton of missions here, which is good if you've got the patience to get good at this game. The campaign runs you through a series of connected levels which all play fairly similarly and is definitely not your usual FPS game like you might expect. This is a lot slower paced, and although you can wander around wherever you like and shoot enemies, you also need to make sure you're keeping an eye on your teammates, so they'll often need to survive. Sometimes you can lose them and they'll be gone for subsequent missions, making things even harder. What's cool is that sometimes you can actually switch between your teammates, and often they'll have different weapons like blasters, flamethrowers, rockets or Wolverine-like claws. Each one even has their own strengths and weaknesses. All the weapons are powerful and can kill most enemies in just a few shots. Thankfully, you also have a decent radar that shows where enemies are, but the problem is that you can only take one hit and you're dead. I literally played missions where I would lose all my units in less than a minute. This is not fun and just incredibly tedious. There is a hell of a lot of trial and error here, and doing the training is absolutely essential if you want to get anywhere. Here you'll learn how to attack efficiently, not waste all your ammo, and even block enemy attacks if you can time it right. You won't get anywhere without learning all this stuff, and even then, the missions get very hard very fast. Actually controlling your characters isn't too bad, and is suitably simple, which is a blessing, and there's a lot more planning than needed in a game like this, and you'll have to replay missions quite a few times in order to learn where best to position your units. Any that you aren't controlling are a little useless, but they do attempt to defend themselves, thankfully. In fact, this really should be described as more of a strategy game than a first-person game. I do quite like the graphics here though. The 3D levels all look a bit samey, but that's normal for most games based on the Warhammer world. Everything is pre-rendered sprites and they look and animate quite nicely. Which is good, because you're going to see the animation of the Gene Stealer killing the hell out of you a lot. I did have to resort to playing this game with cheats, and even then it still wasn't easy to beat a lot of the missions, as there's a lot of factors to take into account, but it certainly was more enjoyable to not die every few minutes. Realistically, I probably wouldn't recommend playing this one. There are a few Space Hulk games out there, and I actually recently picked up the PS3 Space Hulk game, but I haven't had a chance to play it yet. I wonder if it's any better than this one. I have had the chance to play Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team on the PlayStation 3 though. This is a top-down twin-stick shooter where you get to choose from a few different Space Marines and you're on a mission to destroy an Orc cruiser that's headed for your planet, and if it arrives it'll do some serious damage. Once you've boarded the ship, you're guided through a fairly short linear shooter where you need to kill hundreds of Orcs and blow up their ship from the inside. You can choose from a bunch of classes, which is cool. There's a Stern Guard Veteran, a Tech Marine, a Vanguard Veteran and a Librarian. These each have their own stats and special abilities, with some being better with weapons and the others being better with melee attacks. All the characters have access to a few different guns, and there's quite a few unlockable ones as well. These come in the form of pistols, bolters, plasma guns and other weapons that I'm sure fans of the tabletop game are familiar with. In terms of melee, the Tech Marine uses his massive robo arm, which is cool. Some of them have swords or a chainsaw sword, or the big bruiser bloke just whacks people with his chain gun. Suffice it to say, if you're playing as him, you just want to shoot everyone. Littered around the levels there are pickups to help you out. These all have a timer on them, but they do come in handy in some of the massive gunfights. You get weapon power-ups that either double or triple your attack power, there's shields or health pickups that rather than just giving you a lump amount of health, keep refilling it for 30 seconds or so. This is a nice touch, and what I really like is that when you're playing 2-player co-op, which I actually got to try with Belt Buckle Bill, is that the power-ups have a radius on them, so no matter who picks them up, as long as you're close enough to each other, you both get the benefit of the power-up. Also, killing enemies, scenery and boxes gives you points, and these, along with some hidden pickups in the level, unlock new perks that you can add to your character to improve your stats. You'll be killing lots of Orcs here, and doing so is pretty easy, control-wise at least. You just move with the left stick and shoot in any direction with the right stick. If an enemy gets close, just press X to melee them in the face. Orcs are tough though, and they're high in numbers, with most of them taking quite a few hits, which can make the battles pretty tough at times as you can easily be swarmed and your health drained in an instant. Bosses especially can be a pain in the ass, and the game is pretty crappy with checkpoints, sending you right back to the start a lot of the time when you die. Or if you die on a boss that has multiple phases, you always go back to the first phase of that boss fight. This was pretty annoying. Though it kinda does make sense as the game is incredibly short. You only get to explore the spaceship, which isn't massive, and you go from room to room looking for power generators, cores and big weapons to destroy, as well as taking out the commanders of course. In all, it only takes about 3 or 4 hours to play through the whole thing, and you could easily get through it in one sitting if you wanted to, especially if you're playing with a friend. Though, strangely, it's only up to 2 players. You'd expect a game like this to have 4-player co-op. Oh well. Oh, also, it's only couch co-op. There's no online here at all. The graphics here are pretty cool though, and they do look just like the models, as you'd expect for this generation. The animation is good, and even when the camera zooms in, the amount of detail and everything is surprisingly cool, and the environments, although they're pretty samey, look quite detailed. And I do really like the cinematic view you get when you do a particularly cool kill, where it zooms in and slows everything down with blood going everywhere. Even though this is a short, shallow game, which never really amounts to anything more than kill everyone you see and blow everything up, I did have a fair bit of fun with it. There is definitely a place for these types of mindless shooters, especially if you get a friend along to play it, even though it is strictly couch co-op, which, to be fair, is my favourite, so suits me. So yeah, give this one a try if you can. Let's talk regular Warhammer now, and not 40k. Here is Warhammer Chaosbane. This is a top-down isometric RPG that plays similarly to games like Diablo, and of course the Warhammer setting is absolutely perfect for a game like this. And you're seeing it here on the PlayStation 4. You can choose from a selection of the usual fantasy classes here. You get an elf, a dwarf, a soldier, and a witch hunter. Each of these classes has their own stats, as well as a ton of special abilities to unlock and upgrade. As you'd expect, some are better running in with a sword and chopping people to bits, whereas other characters are better at attacking from a distance, or either with a bow. I'm a run in and cut people's heads off kind of guy, so I went for the soldier character. The story here is simple and complex. In a nutshell, the demons of chaos are being bastards and killing people, so you've got to stop them. But of course there's a hell of a lot more exposition when you're playing games like this, and there's plenty of NPCs all over the place giving you their opinions and stories, as well as side quests. You've got a hub world, which is a pretty large town. In fact, if you ask me, it's needlessly large, with all the shops and buildings you need to visit being on opposite sides of the town for no real reason. Ah well. While you're there, various people will give you a bunch of objectives to complete. These always involve exploring dungeons, forests, sewers, and other exciting places where you'll usually need to hunt down a boss monster or find an item, which is obviously guarded by a boss monster as well. But that's exactly what I'd expect from a game like this, so it's not a bad thing. There's a ton of enemies for you to kill, which is cool. A lot of which I actually recognise from the models, and some of them I've even painted. That's always nice to see them, and seeing them brought to life was excellent thanks to some great graphics and animation. There's all sorts of bandits, witches, wizards and freaky monsters that you'll be battling, and they're all fun to fight, even if it does get a little bit repetitive. Almost every button on the controller does either an attack or one of your abilities, and you'll unlock loads of new ones along the way. Each character has attacks as well as buffs and perks that you can assign, and the way it works is a little different from what I'm used to. You've got a total number of skill points, which gets larger as you level up, and each ability or attack costs a certain number of skill points to equip. So basically, it's unlikely you'll be able to equip all of your attacks and abilities most of the time, and you have to pick and choose which ones are best suited for the situation. The abilities all level up separately too, which is nice. For the most part, as the soldier anyway, battles come down to using your powerful attacks and then just spamming your regular one until they recharge, and then using them again. You get gold and experience for killing most things, and you can buy new weapons and armour, and you can also find it in chests throughout the levels. What I do like is that your appearance does change to whatever you have equipped, which is always good to see in games. Now, you can tell that this is a game meant to be played with 4 players, and it can feel a little unbalanced at times with just me on my own, especially on the bosses, which can be a real pain in the ass, and there were a few times where I got caught in a loop of being stunned and attacked that I literally couldn't get out of and had no choice but to die. I did eventually learn the patterns and signs though, so was able to dodge some of this. The graphics here are decent, it is all a bit grey and brown, but it does suit the tone of the game. I will say that the sounds can get a bit annoying with the slashing and grunting being pretty much all you're going to hear, and in large battles it can get a bit tedious. But overall, I really like playing games like these. Levelling up and getting that bit of dopamine is always good, and I think I'm more than halfway through the game, which is about 7 hours in so far. Though it's not outstaying its welcome, and I am going to go through it fully. I might even retry it with a few of the other characters as well, just to see if I just stop my usual thing of being the bruiser with a sword. Well worth a look if you like these sort of games, and you have a couple of mates who would play through it with you. Warhammer 40,000 Boltgun is a really cool retro-style first-person shooter that kind of came out of nowhere. Well, it did for me, but it's a hell of a lot of fun to play. This is also the PS4 version. Guess who went mad on Warhammer games in the January sale? You play as a Stern Guard veteran Ultramarine, and it turns out that a rogue tech priest is being a bit of a shitbag and has managed to open up a rift in space that has brought through some chaos monsters. So you get your bolt gun and you set off to take down the tech priest, as well as his disciples and any of the chaos monsters you meet along the way. As you can see, this is all done in the style of old school shooters like Doom, with some really cool pixel characters and enemies over some 3D levels that wouldn't look out of place in the Quake 2 engine. You'll travel through a variety of areas like icy wasteland, temples, forts, army bases, and even strange alien worlds. You'll be attacked by basically everything you meet, but as a Space Marine you are pretty handy with a few weapons. You've got your bolt gun as your main one, and this is what you'll be using for a good chunk of the game. But you'll also find a shotgun, laser rifle, minigun, and rocket launcher thingy. All of the weapons feel great to use and can actually be upgraded a bit as you progress, including giving them some elemental damage at certain points. As well as this, you can find a few grenades to use, and you even have your chainsword, which is great but kind of dangerous to use, as you've got to get up close. Something that I like is that enemies all have their own life bar, and some enemies are weaker against certain weapons. This really helps you in the middle of battles to see what's doing the most damage. And the battles get pretty bloody difficult, with dozens of enemies coming at you at once, and more spawning in all the time. Enemies also have a ton of different attack patterns. Some have guns, some throw shit at you, some just want to bite your face off up close, and you really need to assess the battleground to see what to take out first. Thankfully, no matter what you kill, they tend to explode in a torrent of cool blood, which is always good. I recommend using your chainsword when enemies are weakened, and you can leave yourself vulnerable otherwise. And no matter what you do, keep on moving if you want to stay alive. The levels are all fairly large, and there's a surprising amount of them. In fact, I was really surprised at how long this game is. As it's old school, your main thing to do is just find the exit of each level, so you got to hunt down keys or switches to open locked doors and kill everything you see. I will say that there were more times that I would have liked where I got lost because the levels all kind of looked similar and I couldn't really tell where I had and hadn't been, and I'd be wandering around for ages looking for a key or a switch that I didn't know was a switch. Thankfully, the controls are really good here. They have a deliberate amount of weight to them as you're a Space Marine in a massive suit of armour, so moving, turning and jumping all has momentum and weight that you don't often see in games like this. It did take me a while to get used to the mechanics, and going back to record this footage, I was definitely rusty. But it soon comes back to you and is a hell of a lot of fun. And that's a great way to sum this one up. It's a hell of a lot of fun. If you're into difficult old school shooters, then this really is a must have. My only real complaints would be the graphics department, which while it does look great, and of course I love the retro style, I still would have liked to have seen a bit more animation on the enemies here. Yeah, I know it is old school, but still, it is modern and they could have done a little bit better. Also, the levels can be confusing to get around. Other than that though, I really had fun with this, and I highly recommend it to any FPS fan, even if you don't care about Warhammer 40,000. Here's another retro style game that you may have missed. It's Warhammer 40,000, Shootas, Blood and Teef, and finally we get to play as the Orcs. Released in 2022, this is a side-scrolling run-and-gun game released for all of the consoles of the time, as well as the PC, and this is the PC version. You get to choose from one of 4 orcs, though there isn't really much in the way of difference between them as far as I could tell, and you're taking charge of an orc invasion. Then, after being screwed over by your own commander, you go on a revenge rampage, where you want to kill other orcs that messed you about, as well as any puny humans that decide to get in your way. This is all done in a 2D side-scrolling game where you control the orc with the keyboard and can aim anywhere you like with the mouse. I like these control setups, and I imagine it would also work well on consoles, though I've never tried, so don't quote me on that. The levels all play basically the same. You explore a fairly large landscape, and eventually the screen will freeze and a ton of enemies will appear. Kill them all and move on until you get to the boss. Kill and carry on. It's a run-and-gun shooter, and it's fun. There are enemies everywhere else, even when the screen hasn't forced you to stop, and the action is pretty relentless, but in a good way. You are quite nimble for a chunky orc, you can run and double jump, and you'll want to explore as much as possible to find money, ammo and health, as well as the odd switch here and there to open something up somewhere else on the level. You need the money to buy new weapons, hats and perks. Scattered around the levels are shopkeepers who let you buy or upgrade your stuff. You can carry a handful of weapons with you at any point, so you'll want a mixture of pistols, shotguns, machine guns, rocket launchers, lasers, and even a melee weapon that makes sure that you're ready for any occasion. As you progress and start killing some of the other big bastard enemies, you actually start to get some respect from the other orcs, and they'll start to help you out instead of trying to kill you. They aren't particularly smart or deadly, but having a few other units to help you out in the levels can make a big difference. The further you get, the more you'll recruit. You can't control them in any way, they just follow you around and kill stuff, which is nice. As you will have seen, the game has a great art style, and I really like the graphics here. It does use that marionette style of graphics, which can sometimes be a bit crappy, but it's done well here, and it's got loads of detail everywhere. There's plenty of blood and guts in the game, and it's got a really good sense of humour. The cutscenes here are already good fun to watch as well, using the in-game graphics. The music here is also very good, with some really cool heavy metal playing through the bigger battles that really puts you into mood to kill shit. It is a short game though, and another one you could easily breeze through in 2 or 3 sittings, but there is a fair amount of replay value thanks to all the weapons and hats you can unlock, and the hats give you various perks by the way, like more health, damage, faster movement, that sort of thing. It is also playable in 4-player co-op, which I can imagine being good, hectic fun. There were times where I felt the controls could have been better, and I do think I'd actually probably prefer to play this with a controller, but that might be because I'm more of a console gamer. Also, this is one of those games where there's just so much going on at all times that it can be very easy to lose your character in the carnage, and this would of course be ramped up in 4-player. But it is still good fun. I don't think I'd recommend paying full price for it, but if you can get it for a $5 or so, then it is worth a look. Here is Necromunda Hired Gun for the PS4. Now, I don't know much about Necromunda, but I believe it's actually its own thing from Games Workshop, though it's a sort of spin-off from 40k, being set in the same universe. I don't know, it's all too much for my tiny brain. They still sell the game in Warhammer shops, so as far as I'm concerned, it counts. As you can see, this is a first-person shooter, where you play as a hired gun. I see what they did there. You are helping to uncover a conspiracy that's going on between a bunch of gangs in the Necromunda underworld. As far as I can tell, the whole point of Necromunda is that it's taking place underground in massive subterranean cities that have been built thanks to the war on the surface of the planet causing all sorts of problems. You get to choose from a few classes, yep, each with their own stats and abilities, and then you're put into the game, which is a pretty linear one where you have a few sets of levels to play through until you've shot everyone in the face. You do have a hub world though, and this is quite important. After the first few levels you'll go to the hub world where you'll get a bunch of shops that let you buy new weapons, upgrade your current weapons, and more importantly, upgrade your augmented robot body. You see, early on in the game you're nearly killed, but you survive and you have a bunch of cybernetics implanted into you. At first you're not very happy about this, but it doesn't take too long for you to realise that these new abilities are actually pretty handy in your line of work. These are slightly different depending on the characters, but you'll get a number of offensive and defensive powers and upgrades. Things like energy blasts you can do from your hands that kill or stun enemies, to things that are passive like the range you can pick up items from, or the frequency of certain item drops, your speed or jump height, and that sort of thing. All of these cost money though, and you'll get them from completing missions. On top of the regular story missions, in the hub world you find a job board. There's always a load of jobs for you to do that pay decent money. There's a few tiers of jobs, with the higher ones paying considerably more money, but these only get unlocked the further you get into the story mode, and they are of course much harder to complete. There's only a few variations of these missions, mostly killing people, but other times you have to rescue captured people, or play a sort of King of the Hill game where you've got to capture territory, or sometimes you just have to survive waves of enemy attacks. These jobs don't seem to run out, and I actually found that I spend a lot of my time doing these missions before taking on the story ones, so I could level myself up pretty decently. And something I haven't mentioned is that you have a Mastiff, a dog companion that also helps you out in every level. You can call on your doggy dude at any point with a simple button press, and it will come and help you kill people. Of course this is awesome, and what's even better is that you can give your doggy mate upgrades too, making it an absolute killing machine that really does change the tide of battle. And the battles here are really the main thing. This game is absolutely action-packed. You'll be fighting loads of enemies all of the time with a ton of different weapons. You can only carry a few weapons at a time, and you'll soon find your favourites and probably stick with them. The gunfights are massive and fast-paced. Thankfully, you are pretty nimble. You can wall run, double jump, slide, and all sorts to get around and dodge enemy fire. And you'll want to choose those upgrades that suit your playstyle, as it can be easy to die here. You even get a really cool grappling hook that you can use to drag yourself onto enemies, or more often for me, to get yourself out of harm's way when you're being overrun. You also have a super powerful melee attack, which if you upgrade it a couple of times will kill most enemies, including massive giant brutes and dreadnoughts, in just 1 or 2 hits. Oh, and something I should mention is the best way to get health and armor back is by killing stuff, so you really do want to kill as much as possible. And as you can see, the game looks fucking incredible. I really think this is one of the best looking games I've seen on the PlayStation 4. The levels all have a crazy amount of detail in them, and the characters all look good and animate well. Unfortunately though, this does come with a pretty hefty frame rate issue, and for me on the PlayStation 4, the game actually crashes quite a lot. In fact, I don't think I've actually played the game for more than an hour or so without it crashing at least once. Couple this with some very long load times and it can be a bit annoying. Thankfully, the game is generous with checkpoints, so I never had to go too far back, and actually I kept wanting to go back. I'm hoping that if you're playing this on a decent PC, or maybe the PS5 or whatever the hell the newest Xbox is called, then you won't have these problems. Also, something that is very annoying is the melee button is the same as the reload button, so there's plenty of times where I get in close and try to melee someone, only to start reloading my gun instead as I'd done it at the wrong time and the melee prompt hadn't appeared. Then I get my ass shot to bits. That's when it's grapple hook time. Despite this though, I do really enjoy playing this game and I've been having an absolute blast with it. It is by no means a complex game in terms of gameplay, it pretty much is just a case of kill everyone you see till you get to the end of the level. But it is well done, and it really makes me want to keep coming back for more. I picked this game up for £4, and it's definitely worth that price if you can get it. Sticking with the games I got on sale for PS4, here is Warhammer the End Times Vermintide. This is a first-person co-op shooter that is essentially Left 4 Dead but in the Warhammer universe, so if you've ever played that, then you know what you're getting here. There is a story, and it is that the evil rat race, the Skaven, are attempting to overrun everything and take over again. And thanks to their crazy rat sex, there's bloody loads of the little shitbags. Why is it always the rats that get this bad rep? But it's okay, 4 characters, a witch hunter, dwarf, elf and wizard, have teamed up to make it their mission to survive the onslaught and see what they can do to stop the end times. The game is split into various levels and even has a proper single-player campaign, which is nice. Well, I say single-player campaign, what I mean is that there's the options to play some of the levels in single-player, and it does have a story between those levels. So you choose your character, who, yes, have their own stats, weapons and abilities, and you're thrown into the levels which have a few objectives that involve killing all the rats you see, as well as completing secondary objectives like finding keys, protecting areas, gathering food, finding other items, and so on. All the levels are pretty damn large and can take the best part of an hour to beat each, which is pretty cool, but also means they sometimes drag on a bit. You'll explore towns, sewers, forests and other fantasy-style levels while completing your objectives, and I do have to say, it looks bloody gorgeous. In an ideal world, you're meant to be playing this with other humans, with your cool headsets and other crap with blue LEDs flashing around everywhere, but the game is really built around teamwork. All of the characters' abilities have ways they can benefit other players by giving buffs, etc. And as well as this, you'll find limited supplies of various items in the levels, and each character can only carry one of them, like a health or magic potion. But you can use these to heal yourself or other characters, much like Left 4 Dead. If a character comes across any of these things, they'll be sure to shout that they've found them so everybody knows, which is handy. Even playing with the computer companions, they do a good job of keeping you alive and healing you when needed, and I never actually had any issues with crappy AI that I could think of. The only thing that was a little bit weird is that you can just walk through pretty much every character, which is a little odd, but at least it meant I didn't get stuck. The main bulk of the game is killing rats though, and there's a few varieties of them. Most of them are just fodder that can be killed very easily. The only real danger is when there's hordes of them attacking you, which does happen quite often. You'll see dozens of rats running at you, and it looks pretty sweet. Each character has a few weapons. You normally get a projectile and a melee, and depending on your character you might have magic or bullet based weapons, or the classic bow. The combat itself is fairly simple, but in a good way. You've got a few combos and magic attacks to use, and you'll need to use most of them to get by, so you want to get efficient at killing most enemy types. There's giant ogre rats that are basically tanks, then there's rats with guns, then they've got a Gatling gun, or a Rattling gun as I should say, and they'll take you out pretty quickly from a distance. There's a rat that will pin you to the ground, and one that's very fast and can jump all over the place. You get a notification when a special rat is around, and again, like Left 4 Dead, you get bonuses for killing them at the end of the level. As mentioned, the game does look fantastic, and it runs pretty smoothly pretty much most of the time, even with dozens of enemies on screen. I did get a few frame rate dips, but nothing too major, and it was impressive considering the high quality of the graphics, and also I'm not really a frame rate whore, sorry. In terms of recommending this one though, it's an odd one. I do think it's a solid game, and if you've got some like-minded friends that would play through it with you, then I think this would be a hell of a lot of fun. But if you're like me and it will be playing solo, then it's not really worth getting. I'll be honest, it's unlikely I'll ever go back to it after playing it for a few hours for this bit of coverage. But if you do like Left 4 Dead and want more of that style of game, then I think this would be well worth a go, as it is basically a reskin of that with a Warhammer twist. VR time now with Warhammer 40,000 Battle Sisters for the Oculus Quest, being played here on the Quest 2 by me. As you'd expect, this is a first-person action game where you play as Ophelia, a battle sister from the Adepta Sororitas army. You're in the middle of a war against Chaos Space Marines, and you have to fight in large battles on a variety of planets, in temples and other standard places for these games, but I don't mean that in a bad way. Being VR, the game really throws you into the deep end, and thankfully after a short intro and a training section, you're put into some quite large but linear levels where you'll fight all sorts of bandits, space marines, aliens and evil chaos demons. You get a few different weapons, but they all feel great to use. There's blaster pistols, bolt guns, flamethrowers, laser rifles, chain guns, grenade launchers, just to name a few. You also find grenades that you can throw at enemies, and you even get a selection of melee weapons like power swords and a chainsword. All of the weapons are really easy to use and feel hefty, which I quite like. Aiming them is of course down to you and how accurate you can be. Reloading is all done manually, and you've got a few options. You can either do it completely manually by ejecting the magazine, grabbing one out of your ammo belt and then inserting it, or you can just eject the mag and hold the gun to your ammo belt for a quicker reload. I tend to prefer manual reloads as it makes me feel more like a badass, but sometimes you'll find it's better to do the quick ones as you're being swarmed. You also have a few magic sort of things that you can do. One is basically force push and lets you shoot a blast from your hand that blasts obstacles out of the way or can knock enemies over or stun them for a bit. You also get a shield ability which protects you for a while, and the slowdown ability that slows down everything except for you. These are done by holding down a button and then doing a gesture. So to do the push, you hold down the button and then punch forward. The shield thing is by holding the button and putting your arm in the air, and so on. These work okay, but I did find that there were times when I was trying to do them and it just wouldn't work. though I have to admit that unless I actually had to use them to progress, I didn't really bother with them anyway. This is one of those games that is a proper first-person game, so it's not on rails, and you can go wherever you like in the levels, though it is linear, so you don't have a hell of a lot of options of where to go. I do prefer a game that gives me free reign of moving though. And there are a few interactive things in levels like buttons and switches that you'll need to push and pull, and these are always pretty satisfying to do and really do help with the immersion. The only bits I didn't really like here are the obligatory story bits, where there's like a whole 20-minute section where you're just following a character around slowly, listening to them chat shit. Some people won't mind this, but personally I would have liked the option to skip these bits and just get back to the action. I guess it does bulk it out, otherwise it's a pretty short game, which is kind of standard for VR really. You can beat this in about 5 or 6 hours, though there are a few game modes to play, including a wave-based multiplayer, so there are reasons to fire it up every now and then. Graphically, I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag. For the most part, it looks decent enough. The weapons all look fantastic, and most of the character models are pretty good, but some of the scenery is a bit ropey. Though, again, this is fairly standard for the Quest 2, and it certainly doesn't look bad. Overall, I really enjoyed playing through the story here, even though it is incredibly predictable, and I would recommend playing this game. There's a few other Warhammer games on the Quest 2, and I'm probably going to give them a try at some point as well. And finally for this long ass video, we're going to be taking a look at the Xbox 360's Warhammer 40k Spacemarine from Sega. This is a third-person action game where you play as Captain Titus, an ultramarine leading an attack on the Forge world Graia, or something along those lines. Orcs are up to their usual tricks and are attacking all over the place in high numbers, so it's up to you and your squad to stop the green gits. There's a lot more that happens as you play, including the obligatory good guy that's clearly a bad guy that you have to be surprised that turns out to be a bad guy, so you've got that to look forward to as you play as well. Throughout the game you'll explore various parts of the planet. Though the scenery doesn't vary too much, you'll be in huge battles in trenches, derelict towns, orc bases, trains and your own bases. But even though they aren't too varied, they are a hell of a lot of fun to play through, and I'll just say it now, this game is really feckin' good. It's pretty much all-out action all the time, and as a Space Marine you've got a few weapons. The game does a great job of mixing the combat between shooting stuff with blasters, bolt guns, shotguns, rockets, etc., and the melee with your chainsword or an axe. No matter your preference though, you're going to have a good time. The battles here are absolutely epic. You'll fight dozens of enemies at a time, and even though you're a massive suit of armour, you're surprisingly nimble. You can pretty much run fast and have a good dodge attack. Shooting enemies is easy and visceral, but anyone that's played the game will know that it's a melee combat that's the most fun. You have loads of combos that you can do with your melee weapon, often resulting in chopping orcs to bite-sized chunks. But more importantly, killing enemies using glory kills is the only way to get your health back. You have standard combos with a weak and strong attack button, and you also have a stun button, and if you time it right you can hit an enemy with this and they'll get a button prompt above their head. Catch them with this button and you'll do a very gory finishing move that will also replenish your health, so you gotta do it. There's quite a few of these and it is random as to which one you do, but they never get old, and if you have a decent sound system, like I do, make sure you crank it up, as the slow motion animation coupled with the massive booming attacks just sounds bloody brilliant. The missions themselves aren't too varied and the game is a linear one. Just follow the path of enemies until you get to a room you can't exit. Then just look around for a switch or maybe something to destroy and you move on. It's all pretty simple stuff, but the epic battles and boss fights really do make up for it. At first glance this might look like a Gears of War ripoff, but it really isn't. There's no cover based nonsense here, it's all about getting stuck in. You unlock various abilities as you play to help out in the battles, like being able to slow down time. This is great and perfect for shooting enemies in the face before they get the chance to get close. Graphically, the game looks really bloody good, and I actually can't believe how good this looks on the Xbox 360. There's so much going on all the time, and the character models are incredible, and I never experienced any slowdown. The only thing I didn't really like is that the game goes black and white when you're low on health. Now I know this is fairly common in games like this, but it does make it harder to see what you're doing. Other than that minor gripe, I really think this is one of the best looking Xbox 360 games that I've played. I would say that this game is a must-own for any Xbox 360 collector, and it was also released on the PS3 and PC, so if you've got one of those then you really need to get this game. I've also seen that a sequel has recently been announced, and I really hope they don't stray too far from the gameplay of this one. If that's the case, then they'll have a winner on their hands. So yeah, get this game, it's awesome. So there you go, a bunch of games based on the Warhammer tabletop games. Now for most of them you don't need to have any interest in the tabletop games to play the video games, and I'm actually really surprised at the high quality of most of them. I've got a bunch more of these games, and there's a ton more for me to check out, so be sure to comment below to tell me your favourites and suggest what other ones I should play. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. For the Emperor.